I opened the HOA statement on November 12, 2023, and the number at the bottom made me blink twice. Monthly fees had jumped from $110 in 2020 to $165 now, a 50% increase in 3 years. My wife Jessica walked into our Naperville kitchen carrying her laptop, still in her work clothes from her forensic accounting firm downtown. "Rob, come look at this," she said, her voice flat in that particular way that meant she'd found something. I set down the mail and moved to her side. She had the HOA's annual budget spreadsheet open, columns of numbers filling her screen. "What am I looking at?" I asked. She pointed to a line item labeled Landscaping Services, Premier Landscape Solutions. The amount was $28,450 for a single quarter. "That's a lot for mowing lawns," I said. Jessica's finger moved to another line. "Parking lot repairs, Prestige Paving and Construction, $42,300. Then another. Roof maintenance, Summit Roofing LLC, $31,800. She looked up at me, and I saw the expression I'd seen hundreds of times during her 15 years at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. "Rob, our HOA president has been stealing from us. A lot, and I think I can prove it. We'd moved into Meadowbrook subdivision 6 years ago, in 2018, when Emma was 8 and Lucas was 5. It was everything we'd wanted: good schools, safe streets, a pool the kids actually used. The HOA seemed fine back then, mostly invisible except for the occasional newsletter. Karen Mitchell had been president for 4 years by the time we arrived. A confident woman in her early 50s who always wore pearls to the annual meetings and talked about fiscal responsibility and community standards. She'd been unopposed in every election since 2016. I'm a high school math teacher at Naperville North, and Jessica had left the FBI in 2019 to work for a private forensic accounting firm after Lucas was diagnosed with asthma and needed someone with flexible hours for doctor visits. We weren't activists or troublemakers. We paid our $165 monthly fee, $1,980 per year, $7,920 total since we'd moved in, and assumed someone was watching the money. That assumption died on November 12th. Jessica spent that entire evening pulling documents. Illinois law, specifically 765 ILCS 605, gives homeowners the right to inspect HOA financial records with 7 days written notice. She drafted a formal request that night, asking for 4 years of bank statements, vendor contracts, invoices, and board meeting minutes. We submitted it on November 15th via certified mail. The response came on November 23rd, a 2-paragraph letter from Karen stating that detailed financial records are available only to board members and offering instead to schedule a meeting to discuss any concerns. Jessica read the letter twice, then looked at me. She just violated state law? That's the first red flag. Over Thanksgiving weekend, while Emma and Lucas were at Jessica's parents' house in Schaumburg, we drove past the 3 vendors listed in that budget. Premier Landscape Solutions had an address that turned out to be a UPS store mailbox. Prestige Paving's listed phone number was disconnected. Summit Roofing's office was a vacant lot next to a Dairy Queen in Aurora. Jessica photographed everything, time-stamped and geotagged. "These are shell companies," she said quietly as we sat in our car outside the vacant lot. "Karen's paying fake vendors and pocketing the money." I felt my stomach knot. "How much are we talking about?" She pulled up her preliminary calculations on her phone. Conservatively, at least $300,000 over 4 years. Maybe more. On December 1st, Jessica filed a second records request, this time citing the specific statute and adding language about potential legal action for noncompliance. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived from Karen, but it contained only 2 years of summarized bank statements with most vendor details redacted, and none of the contracts or invoices Jessica had requested. The accompanying letter, now signed by the HOA's attorney Richard Pollock of Pollock & Associates, stated that the board has provided all documents required under Illinois law and warned against harassing communications that could constitute defamation. Jessica set the letter down and made a phone call. 20 minutes later, she hung up and turned to me. "I just hired David Kim. He specializes in HOA law and says Karen's attorney is full of it. We're filing a formal complaint with the Illinois Attorney General's office and requesting a court order for full disclosure." David Kim worked fast. By December 18th, we had a court date set for January 9th, 2024. Karen's attorney tried to delay, but the judge, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Hoffman, ordered the HOA to produce all requested documents by January 15th or face contempt charges. The documents arrived in 4 bankers' boxes on January 12th, delivered by a process server who looked apologetic. Jessica took 3 days off work. She set up in our dining room, converting it into what looked like an FBI field office. Boxes organized by year, spreadsheets on dual monitors, a whiteboard covered in numbers and arrows. Emma came home from school on the second day and stopped in the doorway. "Mom, are you investigating someone?" Jessica looked up, hesitated, then nodded. "The HOA president. She's been stealing money that should have gone to fixing our roads and maintaining the pool." Emma, 14 and suddenly very serious, asked, "Can I help?" Lucas, now 11, piped up from behind her. "Me too." I expected Jessica to say no, but instead she handed Emma a stack of invoices. "Check every vendor name against this list of legitimate Illinois business registrations. Circle anything that doesn't show up." To Lucas, she gave a simpler task. "Count how many times you see the same signature. Tell me if they look identical or if there are differences." The kids worked for 2 hours that evening, and Emma found something. "Mom, this company, Premier Landscape Solutions, isn't registered anywhere in Illinois. Neither is Prestige Paving." Lucas held up 3 invoices. "These signatures all look exactly the same, like someone traced them." By January 22nd, Jessica had built what she called the scaffold. She'd identified $387,420 in fraudulent transactions across 4 years, broken into 4 major categories. First, inflated vendor payments. Premier Landscape Solutions had received $96,000 for quarterly landscaping that should have cost $35,000 based on market rates, an overcharge of $61,000. Prestige Paving had been paid $127,000 for parking lot repairs that never happened. Our neighbor Tom Bradley, a contractor, confirmed the lot hadn't been resurfaced in 6 years. Summit Roofing had billed $89,000 for roof maintenance on our clubhouse. The roof was original from 2009 and showed no signs of repair. Second, phantom services. Karen had created a line item for HOA management services starting in January 2021, paying herself $2,000 per month, $84,000 total, despite our bylaws stating the president position is volunteer only. Third, hidden fees. Jessica found $31,000 for $120 in administrative processing fees paid to something called Meadowbrook Administrative Solutions, which had the same business address as Premier Landscape, the UPS store mailbox. Fourth, cash withdrawals. Karen had authorized 83 petty cash withdrawals totaling $47,000, with vague descriptions like community event supplies and emergency maintenance materials. None corresponded to actual events or maintenance records. Jessica applied forensic techniques I'd only read about. She used Binford's law, a mathematical principle about the distribution of first digits in naturally occurring numbers, and found that the Premier Landscape invoices showed statistically impossible patterns, suggesting someone had fabricated the amounts. She analyzed metadata on digital invoices and discovered that 14 different vendor invoices had been created on the same computer, Karen's home PC, based on embedded printer identification codes. She cross-referenced Karen's personal social media posts with the dates of large HOA expenditures and found that Karen had taken a 2-week Mediterranean cruise in July 2022, 3 days after the HOA paid Prestige Paving $42,000. In October 2023, Karen posted photos from a girls' weekend in Napa Valley, timed right after an $18,500 payment to Summit Roofing. The evidence was overwhelming, but I kept asking Jessica the same question. What if we're wrong? What if there's an explanation? She'd pause, consider, then show me another document. "Rob, I've investigated financial crimes for 17 years. I know what fraud looks like. This is fraud." On February 3rd, 2024, Jessica requested a meeting with the HOA treasurer, Phil Anderson, a retired accountant who'd been on the board for 8 years. We met at a Starbucks on Ogden Avenue. Phil was 72, cautious, and deeply uncomfortable. "I appreciate you wanting to discuss the budget," he started. "But I should tell you, Karen handles most of the vendor relationships directly." Jessica slid a folder across the table. "Phil, I need you to look at these." Inside were copies of the 3 vendor invoices with the UPS store address circled, screenshots of the vacant lot, and a summary of the $387,420 in questionable transactions. Phil's face went pale as he flipped through the pages. His hands started shaking on the 3rd page. "Oh my God," he whispered. "I signed some of these checks. Karen told me they were legitimate vendors. She said she'd verified everything." Jessica leaned forward. "Phil, I need you to tell me everything you know about how Karen processes vendor payments." Over the next 90 minutes, Phil laid it out. Karen had convinced the board 5 years ago to streamline the payment process by giving her sole authority to approve vendors and issue checks up to $50,000 without board vote. Phil would receive a monthly summary, but rarely the underlying invoices. He'd raised questions twice, once in 2021, once in 2023, and both times Karen had provided what looked like legitimate documentation. "She's very persuasive," Phil said quietly, "and I trusted her. We all did." By mid-February, Jessica had assembled 127 pages of evidence, organized into sections with color-coded tabs, and an executive summary that read like a federal indictment. She'd also done something I hadn't expected. She'd reached out to her former FBI colleague, Special Agent Maria Martinez, who worked in the Chicago field office's white-collar crime unit. Maria couldn't officially investigate without a formal referral, but she reviewed Jessica's findings off the record. "This is solid work," Maria told her over the phone, loud enough for me to hear on speaker. "You've got wire fraud, mail fraud, probably tax evasion if she didn't report this as income. Once you file a criminal complaint, the Bureau will take it seriously." Jessica thanked her, then asked the question that had been keeping me awake. "Maria, what's the realistic timeline for something like this? If we file complaints now, when does Karen actually face consequences?" There was a pause. "Federal cases move slow, Jess. Investigation takes 6 to 9 months minimum. Grand jury indictment adds another 3 to 6 months. Trial or plea deal, another 6 to 12 months. You're looking at 2 years, maybe more, from complaint to sentencing." My heart sank. 2 years. "But," Maria continued, "you've done 90% of the investigative work already. That'll speed things up. And if Karen's attorney is smart, he'll advise a guilty plea once he sees your evidence. That could cut the timeline to 12 to 18 months. On February 28, 2024, we filed formal complaints with 3 entities: the Illinois Attorney General's Consumer Fraud Bureau, the FBI's Chicago field office, and the DuPage County State's Attorney. We also sent a certified letter to every member of the HOA board, 5 people including Karen, demanding an emergency special meeting under the bylaws provision allowing 20% of homeowners to call such a meeting. We'd spent 2 weeks going door to door, collecting signatures. Out of 312 homes in Meadowbrook, we got 127 signatures, 40% of the community. Some people signed immediately, others were skeptical. A retired veteran named George Morrison told me, "Karen's always been good to us. I find it hard to believe she'd steal." I showed him the vacant lot photo. He signed. A single mother named Andrea Cole, who lived 3 houses down, started crying when I explained the situation. "I've been barely making the fee increases," she said. "I thought it was inflation. You're telling me it was just theft." She signed, then added, "I want to help. What else can you need?" The emergency meeting was scheduled for March 15th, 7 p.m. at Meadowbrook Community Center. Jessica prepared a presentation, 30 slides, every major finding summarized with supporting documentation. David Kim, our attorney, advised us on legal boundaries. We could present evidence of irregularities and demand an independent audit, but we had to avoid direct accusations of criminal conduct to prevent defamation claims. "Stick to facts and questions," he said. "Let the evidence speak." The day before the meeting, Karen called me. It was the first time we'd spoken directly since this began. Her voice was tight, controlled. "Robert, I understand you've been spreading rumors about HOA finances. I want you to know that you're making a serious mistake. Everything has been properly documented and approved by our attorney and auditor." I kept my voice even. "Karen, we're not spreading rumors. We've found significant discrepancies in the records you provided, and we're exercising our right as homeowners to request an independent audit. That's all." There was a long silence. "Then, you're going to regret this." She hung up. Jessica, who'd been listening on speaker, looked at me. "She just threatened you." I recorded that. It's evidence of consciousness of guilt. March 15th arrived. The community center parking lot was packed by 6:45 p.m. We later counted 240 households represented, an unprecedented turnout. Inside, the room was set up with rows of folding chairs facing a table where the 5 board members sat. Karen in the center, Phil to her right, and 3 others who looked varying degrees of uncomfortable. Karen opened with a prepared statement about baseless accusations from disgruntled homeowners and full confidence in our financial management. Then Jessica stood up. I'm requesting 15 minutes to present findings from my analysis of the financial records this board provided under court order. Karen tried to object, but David Kim stood and cited the specific bylaw provision requiring the board to hear homeowner concerns at special meetings. The room went silent. Jessica walked to the front, connected her laptop to the projector, and began. She showed the UPS store mailbox, the vacant lot, the metadata analysis, the Benford's law charts. She walked through each category of fraud, every inflated invoice, every phantom payment. She showed Karen's social media posts next to the timeline of suspicious transactions. The room was so quiet I could hear the HVAC system humming. When Jessica finished, she said simply, I'm formally requesting that this board immediately suspend Karen Mitchell from all financial authority, hire an independent forensic auditor, and file criminal complaints with appropriate law enforcement agencies. I've already filed complaints myself, but the HOA should do so as well to preserve our insurance claims. Karen stood up, her face flushed red. This is a witch hunt. Those documents are being misinterpreted by someone who doesn't understand HOA accounting. Every single transaction was legitimate and approved. Phil Anderson interrupted her, his voice shaking. Karen, I've been reviewing the documents myself since February. I can't explain these discrepancies. I think we need to take Jessica's request seriously. Another board member, Margaret Chen, no relation to us, nodded. I move that we vote to suspend Karen Mitchell's financial authority pending an independent audit. The vote was 4 in favor, 0 against, with Karen abstaining. Karen gathered her papers, stood, and walked out without another word. The room erupted in conversations. We stayed for another 2 hours as the board appointed Phil as interim president and authorized hiring Midwest Financial Forensics, a firm Jessica had recommended, to conduct a full forensic audit. The cost would be $28,000, paid from the HOA's reserve fund. Andrea Cole, the single mother who'd signed our petition, stood up near the end. I just want to say thank you to the Chens. A lot of us were struggling with these fee increases and felt like we had no voice. You gave us a voice. The forensic audit took 7 weeks. Midwest Financial Forensics assigned a team of 3 CPAs who went through 8 years of records. Jessica had only analyzed 4. Their final report, delivered on May 6, 2024, confirmed 387,420 in fraudulent transactions from 2020 through 2023, plus an additional 64,830 from 2016 through 2019 that Jessica hadn't seen. Total theft, 452,250. The report also identified Karen's brother-in-law, Raymond Kowalski, as the owner of Premier Landscape Solutions, a shell company he'd created in 2016 specifically to receive HOA payments. Ray had split the money with Karen 60-40. The auditors found email correspondence between Karen and Ray discussing how to make the invoices look legit and how to time payments to avoid suspicion. One email from Karen in March 2021 was particularly damning. Need another $20,000 by end of month. Medical bills piling up and credit cards maxed at $83,000. Can you invoice for the spring mulching project we talked about? Ray's response, done. But we need to slow down after this. Phil's asking more questions. The audit revealed that Karen had started the scheme in late 2016 after her husband Daniel lost his sales job at a pharmaceutical company, and they faced mounting debt from years of lifestyle inflation. 2 car leases they couldn't afford, and their daughter's private college tuition at $48,000 per year. What started as a temporary borrowing of $5,000 in December 2016 snowballed into systematic theft as Karen realized how easy it was to manipulate the accounting. The report concluded with a section on insurance recovery. Meadowbrook's HOA policy included $500,000 in crime coverage for employee dishonesty and theft. The board filed a claim on May 10th. The insurance company, State Farm, assigned an investigator who reviewed the forensic audit, interviewed Phil and two other board members, and on June 14th approved a payout of $380,000, the confirmed amount from 2020 through 2023 minus the policy's $25,000 deductible. The older claims from 2016 through 2019 couldn't be recovered due to the statute of limitations on insurance claims and incomplete documentation from that period. Meanwhile, the federal investigation was moving. FBI agents interviewed Jessica on March 22nd, taking copies of all her evidence. They interviewed Phil, Tom Bradley, several vendors, and Karen's bank. On April 18th, they executed search warrants on Karen's home and Ray Kowalski's apartment, seizing computers, financial records, and Karen's personal bank statements. Those statements showed $287,000 in unexplained deposits from 2020 through 2023, matching the time frame of the HOA thefts. Forensic analysis of Karen's seized computer revealed she'd been using QuickBooks to track the stolen funds separately, essentially keeping a second set of books. The file was password protected and titled Personal Projects, but FBI cyber specialists cracked it within hours. Inside was a detailed ledger showing every fraudulent transaction, every split with Ray, and notes about which board members asked questions and how she deflected them. On May 30th, a federal grand jury in Chicago indicted Karen Mitchell and Raymond Kowalski on multiple counts: conspiracy to commit wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. 1343, 7 counts of wire fraud, 4 counts of mail fraud under 18 U.S.C. 1341, and 2 counts of tax evasion under 26 U.S.C. 7201. The tax evasion charges came from Karen failing to report the stolen funds as income. She owed approximately $94,000 in federal taxes plus penalties and interest. Ray was separately charged with aiding and abetting. The indictment was unsealed on June 5th, and both were arrested at their homes. Karen's bail was set at $100,000. She posted it the same day, using her house as collateral. Ray couldn't make bail and stayed in federal detention. This is where things got complicated in ways I hadn't anticipated. Karen's arrest made the Naperville Sun on June 6th, then the Chicago Tribune on June 7th with the headline, Naperville HOA President Charged in $450,000 Embezzlement Scheme. Our neighborhood became a media circus for a week. Reporters knocking on doors, TV trucks parked on our street, neighbors suddenly wanting to talk to us. Some were supportive. Others blamed us for ruining the community's reputation. A few questioned whether an Asian American couple should be making these kinds of accusations against a longtime resident, comments that stung more than I wanted to admit. One neighbor, an older white man named Doug Patterson who lived 2 streets over, confronted me at the grocery store. "You know, Karen's family has lived in Naperville for 3 generations. Maybe you people don't understand how things work here." I felt my jaw tighten, but before I could respond, Tom Bradley appeared from the next aisle. "Doug, I've lived here 30 years, and Karen stole from all of us, including you. The Chins did what the rest of us were too scared or lazy to do. Show some respect." Doug muttered something and walked away. Tom turned to me. "Don't let guys like him get to you. Most of us see what you did." Emma came home from school crying on June 10th because classmates had seen the news and were asking if her mom put someone in jail. Lucas became quiet and withdrawn, spending hours in his room. Jessica and I had several hard conversations about whether we'd made the right choice, whether exposing this had been worth the upheaval. On June 12th, we sat down with both kids at dinner. "I want you both to understand something," Jessica said, her voice firm but gentle. "What we did wasn't about putting anyone in jail. It was about making sure our neighbors, including families who were struggling to pay these inflated fees, weren't being stolen from. Sometimes doing the right thing is uncomfortable and people won't understand it at first. But that doesn't make it wrong." Emma looked up, her eyes red. "Mom, do you think she'll go to prison?" Jessica nodded. "Probably yes." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, "Good. She stole from people who trusted her. That's worse than just stealing money." Lucas added softly. "And she tried to scare Dad. That was mean." I reached across and squeezed his shoulder. "You're both right. And I'm proud that you helped us. This was a family effort." Karen's attorney, predictably, was Richard Pollock, who tried initially to negotiate a plea deal but overplayed his hand by offering only restitution and probation. The federal prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Zhang, wasn't interested. Your client stole nearly $500,000 over 8 years, he told Pollock in a July 15 status conference we attended as witnesses. That's not a probation case. But then something interesting happened. In early August, the board received an anonymous tip, later traced to a disgruntled paralegal at Pollock's firm, revealing that Pollock and Associates had received $18,000 in legal fees from one of Karen's shell companies, Meadowbrook Administrative Solutions, between 2021 and 2023. Pollock had been billing the HOA for legal advice, while simultaneously receiving payments from Karen's fraudulent entity, creating an insurmountable conflict of interest. David Kim filed a motion to disqualify Pollock, and on August 9th, the judge granted it. Pollock withdrew from the case, and Karen had to find new representation. She hired a public defender after her assets were frozen pending asset forfeiture proceedings. By August, Ray Kowalski had flipped. Facing 15 to 20 years if convicted on all counts, he accepted a plea deal. He'd testify against Karen in exchange for a reduced sentence of 36 months and full restitution of his share. His cooperation was devastating to Karen's defense. He provided emails, text messages, recorded phone calls where they discussed the scheme, and bank records showing the money flow. He also testified before the grand jury about how it started. Karen called me in December 2016. He told prosecutors in a deposition we later read. She was crying, said Dan lost his job and they were going to lose the house. Asked if I could help her borrow $5,000 from the HOA and pay it back later. I knew it was wrong, but she's my sister-in-law, family, you know? So I set up Premier Landscape, submitted a fake invoice, split the money with her 80-20 at first. Then she said they needed more, then more. By 2018, it was just automatic. Every quarter, I'd send invoices, she'd approve payments. We'd split it 60-40. I kept telling myself we'd stop, but he trailed off. The prosecutors asked if Karen ever expressed remorse. Once, Ray said. In 2022, after that Starbucks meeting where the treasurer Phil started asking questions, she texted me, maybe we should stop. This is getting too big. But then 2 weeks later, she needed money for her daughter's graduation trip to Europe. $15,000. We kept going. On September 18th, Karen's new attorney, a court-appointed public defender named Sarah Bronstein, advised her to accept a plea. On October 3, 2024, Karen Mitchell stood in U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Illinois and pleaded guilty to 1 count of wire fraud and 1 count of tax evasion. As part of the plea agreement, she admitted to embezzling $387,000 for $120 from the HOA, accepted joint and several liability with Ray for full restitution, and agreed to a sentencing range of 63 to 78 months under federal guidelines. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for December 12, 2024. Jessica and I submitted a victim impact statement, as did 14 other Meadowbrook homeowners. Andrea Cole's statement was particularly powerful. I'm a single mother working 2 jobs to support my son. When the HOA fees went from $110 to $165, I had to cut back on groceries. I skipped meals so my son wouldn't have to. I thought it was just the cost of living. Finding out it was theft, that someone looked at families like mine and decided we were easy targets, that broke something in me. I want the court to know that this wasn't victimless. Every dollar she stole came from real people with real struggles. At the hearing, Karen's attorney argued for the low end of the guideline range, citing her age, 53, lack of prior criminal history, and her own health issues, diabetes and high blood pressure. Karen herself gave a brief statement, apologizing for my terrible lapse in judgment and the pain I've caused. She didn't make eye contact with any of us. The judge, the Honorable Samuel Brewer, wasn't sympathetic. Miss Mitchell, you held a position of trust in your community. For 8 years, you systematically stole from your neighbors, many of whom were struggling financially. You created fake companies, forged documents, and lied repeatedly to cover your tracks. This wasn't a momentary lapse. It was a calculated, sustained fraud. Your own communications show you understood the harm you were causing, but continued anyway because you wanted to maintain a lifestyle you couldn't afford. That kind of entitlement and disregard for others warrants significant punishment. He sentenced her to 84 months, 7 years, in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. She was also ordered to pay full restitution of $387,000 for 120 jointly with Ray Kowalski, plus $94,000 to the IRS, and to forfeit her house and 2 vehicles. The asset forfeiture proceedings took another 2 months, but in February 2025, the U.S. Marshals Service sold Karen's home, a 4-bedroom colonial in Naperville that she and Daniel had purchased in 2003. After paying off the remaining mortgage of $293,000 and a home equity line of credit of $42,000 that Karen had maxed out in 2023, the remaining equity was $73,000. Her 2 vehicles, a 2021 Lexus RX and a 2020 Honda Accord, sold at auction for an additional $19,000. Total recovery from asset forfeiture, $92,000. Ray was sentenced separately on December 19 to 42 months, per his plea agreement. The insurance payout of $380,000 was distributed to the HOA's accounts in January 2025, along with the $92,000 recovered from asset sales. The board voted to use the recovered funds to replenish the reserve fund, reduce monthly fees back to $125, still higher than the 2020 level but much more reasonable, and fund several long-deferred maintenance projects. The parking lot finally got resurfaced in February 2025. The clubhouse roof was replaced in March, and the pool underwent major repairs in April. Phil Anderson served as president through the end of his term in May 2025, then stepped down. The new board, elected in June 2025, implemented several reforms Jessica had recommended. All checks now require 2 signatures from different board members. A certified external CPA conducts quarterly reviews. Financial statements are posted online within 10 days of month end, and any vendor contract over $5,000 requires competitive bids from at least 3 companies. The board also mandated criminal background checks for all board members and officers, and established a whistleblower hotline for residents to report concerns anonymously. These changes became a model. David Kim told us that 3 other Illinois HOAs had adopted similar policies after reading about our case. But the personal costs were real. Emma struggled with anxiety for months, worried that someone would blame us or that Karen's family would retaliate. We got her into therapy in July 2024, and by late fall she was doing better, even writing a school essay about civic responsibility that won a local award from the Naperville Rotary Club. Lucas took longer to process everything. He didn't talk about it much, but I'd find him sometimes sitting at Jessica's old dining room setup, looking at the whiteboard we'd never fully erased. In February 2025, 10 months after the investigation ended, he asked me, "Dad, was it worth it? All the stress and people being mad at us." I sat down next to him. "Buddy, here's what I've learned. Doing the right thing doesn't always feel good while you're doing it. But years from now, when you look back, you'll know you stood up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. That matters more than being comfortable." He nodded slowly, then said, "I think Mom's really brave." I smiled. "Yeah, she is." Jessica went back to her normal work in early 2025, though she got several calls from other HOAs asking for consulting on fraud prevention. She turned most of them down. "I'm not trying to build a side business out of this," but did agree to speak at a Community Associations Institute conference in April 2025, where she presented a session on red flags in HOA financial management. Over 200 HOA board members attended. I asked her once, in June 2025, if she regretted any of it. We were sitting on our back deck, watching the kids play basketball in the driveway. She thought for a long time. "I regret that it was necessary," she finally said. "I regret that someone we trusted did this to our community. But do I regret investigating and reporting it? No. If I'd stayed silent, knowing what I knew, I couldn't have lived with myself. And I wouldn't have wanted Emma and Lucas to learn that silence is acceptable when you witness wrongdoing." She turned to look at me. "What about you? You didn't sign up for any of this when you married a forensic accountant." I laughed. "Rob, you literally did sign up for this. I told you on our 3rd date that I spent my days investigating financial crimes." "Fair point," I conceded. The final chapter came in September 2025, almost 2 years after Jessica first spotted those suspicious invoices. The Meadowbrook HOA held its annual meeting, the first since all the reforms had been implemented. Attendance was high, 198 households, the second highest in our history after the March 2024 emergency meeting. The new president, a retired engineer named Marcus Webb, presented the financial report. Reserve fund fully funded at $287,000, operating budget balanced, all vendor contracts competitively bid and documented. He then did something unexpected. I want to recognize two people who demonstrated extraordinary courage and integrity over the past 2 years, Marcus said, looking directly at Jessica and me. Robert and Jessica Chen could have looked the other way when they found financial irregularities. Instead, they spent hundreds of hours, endured significant personal stress, and even some community hostility to expose fraud and protect this community. On behalf of the board and the homeowners, thank you. The room applauded. It was awkward and overwhelming and deeply moving. Andrea Cole stood up. I'd like to add something. What the Chins did wasn't just about money. It was about trust and accountability. They showed us that we don't have to accept wrongdoing just because it's uncomfortable to challenge authority. That's a lesson my son is going to grow up understanding because of them. More applause. As we drove home that night, Emma in the back seat scrolling through her phone and Lucas asleep against the window, Jessica reached over and took my hand. You know what's strange? She said quietly. 2 years ago, I was just trying to figure out why our HOA fees were going up. I wasn't trying to be a hero or make a statement. I just saw something wrong and couldn't unsee it. I squeezed her hand. That's what integrity is, though. It's not about grand gestures. It's about small choices, to look closer instead of looking away, to ask questions instead of accepting easy answers, to act even when it's easier to stay silent. She smiled. When did you become a philosopher? I teach high school, I said. Philosophy is self-defense. We pulled into our driveway. The house lights were on, warm and welcoming. Inside, the dining room was back to being just a dining room. No boxes, no whiteboards, no evidence folders. But the lessons remained. Emma had learned that speaking up matters even when it's hard. Lucas had learned that his parents believed in accountability more than comfort. And Jessica and I had learned that our community, when given the truth and the opportunity to act on it, would choose justice over convenience. That was worth every difficult moment. In January 2026, we received a letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office informing us that Karen Mitchell had begun serving her sentence at FCI Pekin, a federal prison in central Illinois, and that the restitution payments would be managed through the Bureau of Prisons Inmate Financial Responsibility Program. We'd likely receive small monthly payments, maybe $50 to $100, for years, perhaps decades, until the full $387,000 for 120 was repaid. The insurance recovery had already made us whole financially, so the restitution felt more symbolic than practical. But symbols matter. Every payment would be a reminder that actions have consequences, that theft from a community isn't a victimless crime, and that ordinary people with a spreadsheet and a conscience can hold the powerful accountable. That's the story I'll tell when Emma and Lucas are older and ask about the year their mother took down an HOA president. It's not a story about revenge, really, though there's satisfaction in seeing justice done. It's a story about responsibility. The responsibility we all have to pay attention, to question, to verify, and to act when we find that trust has been betrayed. It's a story about a math teacher and a forensic accountant who decided that $165 a month mattered, not because of the money itself, but because of what the money represented, a community's resources, held in trust, and the obligation to protect that trust even when it's uncomfortable. And it's a story about how a dining room table, a laptop, and 127 pages of evidence can change everything.